Hey guys, so the game I'm going to share with you today is something I'm very, very happy about because I've actually, it's my best win, my highest rating opponent that I've beaten in rapid time format. This is a 20-minute game, so I went on to open challenges in live play, and I'd had a poor couple of days really on online chess. And I've figured something out. It's like something that people have always said and chess teachers have said and is often said in the forums. But sometimes, you just have to figure something out for yourself, don't you, through experience. And that is that it's much better, if you can, to play higher rated opponents than playing lower rated opponents. It's actually very interesting to play lower rated opponents as well, because I think one of the things it teaches you is not to take your foot off the gas when you feel like you're winning. Right? It's a horrible, horrible feeling, and I know we all know this feeling when you're playing somebody who's like 200 points rated below you, and you think, oh, I've got this in the bag, and then you play a couple of stupid blunders, and you notice that they are slowing down because they are playing the high-rated opponent. Okay, so it's very easy to get lulled into a false sense of security when you're playing somebody who's lower rated, and in fact it gives them an advantage, I think, in certain ways. So interesting today. So I played like 6 games this morning, lost I think all of them, something like that, against people similar rating or a couple lower rated as well. And then I thought, I'm just gonna, if I'm not playing that well, I'm gonna, I'll pick someone from the open challenges and who will probably beat me, but it'll be an experience, okay? And I won. And I think that as a general rule, I might try and do this all the time now, because if you're good, and it goes back to that kind of general rule, right? Don't practice playing badly. Don't practice playing bad chess. Okay, so if you're learning chess, if you're trying to improve, I don't think that short blitz and bullet games are your friend, because you're not going to be playing your best chess, right? You should only be playing those fast time formats if you can think that fast. If you know that you're going to be making good moves, pretty much every time. Okay, if you're blundering, you're playing too fast, and slow down. That is the number one rule, really, for chess bootcamp. So let's have a look at this game. So my opponent's rated 1567. I'm rated 1415 at the time. And my previous best win, I think, was like 1530. Okay, so I open with e4, and he plays the Scandinavian d5 in response. Okay, so then I capture, which is the appropriate move. And then he plays this weird looking move, and I've never seen it before. I actually sent him a message saying this is new. Chess.com is telling me it's called the Blackburn Kloosterboer gambit. Sounds Dutch to me, or South African. So he's offering a second pawn. Now, a general principle, if you face a gambit that you've never faced before and you think your opponent knows what they're doing and isn't just like throwing pieces around, the general rule is don't accept the second pawn. I think my opponents would have fared better against me in the Danish and things like that if they refused that second pawn. However, I was curious, so I wanted to know what's he got in store. What is this gambit? What's he going to pull on me? So I sent him a message and said I'm going to take it because I want to know what happens. So I take. Knight recaptures. Okay, so he's given up 2 pawns. He's given up 1 pawn. Okay, so in return for his 1 pawn, he's got the lead in development because his knight's out in the board. All right, I follow with the opposing knight. Knight to f6, and then bishop out to b5, pinning the knight against the king. So I'm taking 10 seconds or more for each of these moves. Brings out his light square bishop to block the pin, breaking the pin, and I decide to castle. I just, if stuff's going to go down, I want to get my king safe as quickly as I can. He plays e6, creating a path for his dark square bishop to come out, and I follow with d4. So his knight here on c6 is looking at that pawn, but it's defended by the queen, so he's not going to capture that. If he captures, I could capture the bishop, then I suppose queen could capture, but he doesn't. So he moves his bishop out to e7, and so now I'm thinking 49 seconds, 36 seconds. I am taking my time, right? Very, very important. And he's rattling out his moves, right? 3.9 seconds is the longest he spent thinking so far, okay? Because he'll be there thinking, you know, I'm 150 points higher than this clown that I'm playing. I shouldn't have any problems. And the moment you start thinking that, your opponent has an advantage. Okay, so bring the bishop out. The knight isn't pinned, but I figure the bishop may as well be out on the board. Black castles, and I push c3 to strengthen my pawn chain here. My bishop is still able to move freely around that side. My dark square bishop's on the other side of the board. That's not an issue. He kicks my bishop, and I move it back to d3, where it at least has got an eye on h7 there. And of course, this bishop is looking at this knight as well. So if I need to take that knight out, I can do. Again, he kicks my bishop away with another pawn. And I've been thinking in general that this is like a tactical pawn move, right? I stress a lot that you should be very careful about making pawn moves. Why? Because pawns can't move backwards. Once they've moved, they can only keep going. So any time you make a pawn move, you are changing the structure of the board. So they shouldn't be done for trivial reasons, really. So this one I'm not sure about. But maybe he sees that I could take out his defensive knight, and maybe he thinks that that's a worthwhile move to make. So I simply move my bishop back to h4, and he centralizes his knight now in the board. So he's now got two attackers. This is like a double discovered attack on the bishop by the queen and his dark square bishop. So if he takes, my knight takes back, queen takes, he's won a piece. So I can't let that happen. So I move my bishop back to g3. I'm still thinking in quite careful, quite defensive mode, and that's exactly the right thing to be doing when you're playing a strong opponent. Okay, yes, you have to win the game. You'll have to find a way to win the game at some point, but it does pay to be careful. Now he plays another pawn move, right? f5, which is obviously weakening the space around his king. And I decide that e5 looks like a really nice pocket to stick my knight in. Even if he takes with the knight on c6, I can then put my bishop in there. So this is now an outpost, because there is no f-pawn and no d-pawn that can challenge a piece on this square. He does take. I recapture obviously with the bishop. I don't want to leave a pawn out there, in the middle of the board. But the bishop's in a good position there. It's looking at g7. So I could maybe swing my queen around, maybe to g3 with some mating ideas. But obviously he's too good to let that happen. So knight comes back to block in. So his king is now starting to look like he's gathering his friends around him for some protection as well. But I'm feeling like this is a fairly comfortable position. I don't know what the point of that Blackburn Cloister gambit was, but it certainly hasn't bitten me yet. So I must have handled it fairly well, okay? And I simply did that by taking my time. So next move, I'm going to bring my remaining pieces into the attack. There's no point leaving them sitting on the sidelines. So out comes my knight. He maneuvers his bishop, where it's now on this very nice long diagonal pointing down towards my king. My bishops are pointing towards his king as well, and that's all good. So I move my bishop now to c4, where it's looking at this undefended pawn there on e6. The other thing to note is that so this pawn is now it's it's undefended, B, it's pinned as well. C, it's the only defender of the pawn on f5. So, when you see a pattern like this, you're thinking, okay, is there some way, like even if I took that pawn with my queen, I can do it safely. This pawn is effectively undefended because it's pinned against the king. It's an absolute pin. He cannot move that pawn legally, right? So he brings his bishop in to block, and I double up the attack with my queen. He plays b5, forcing my bishop to basically exchange because I can't move out of the way or his bishop takes my queen. So I take, queen takes. Now I've got a decision to make. So if I take his queen with my queen, we're going into an ending. Okay, I'm playing a stronger opponent, and he's going to recapture almost certainly with that knight. Okay, so this is like what I do. I want to take like a Polaroid picture. If the queens are off the board and his knight is there on d5, how does that board look? Right. Alternatively, what else can I do? Okay, so now I'm thinking about the relative strength of the pieces that each of us has got on the board. Okay, our queens are pretty much equal. They've got lots of board to play on. I do have this quite tasty, strong pawn chain on the light squares there. So because my bishop is a dark squared bishop, it can maneuver around, it can get through that pawn chain. That's not a problem. But black also has a dark squared bishop, so his bishop can maneuver. Is that, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, my pawns are on the dark square. In fact, yeah, so swipe that. I've coloured them in so I can't tell what's what now. Okay, the pawns are on dark squares, we've both got dark square bishops, okay? What that means is that it restricts the movement of these bishops, okay? It makes these bishops slightly worse. However, this knight is looking like quite a mobile piece. And I'm also liking my knight at the moment as well. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I think that his knight is a stronger piece on the board than my bishop. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to exchange one for the other. Right? Haven't exchanged queens at this point. He recaptures. Okay, if yeah, he could have also taken my queen at that point and then recaptured, but he decides not to. Generally, that makes sense. If you are the stronger player, you want to keep pieces on the board, keep the game complex, and create opportunities for yourself. You don't want to risk simplifying too much. I am not the stronger player, and so I see an opportunity here. I see that if I capture his queen, he's got to recapture with a pawn, and now that's given him an isolated central pawn on d5. Okay, so he's got an awkward structure there around his king. He's got a decent pair there on the A and B files. I, on the other hand, have got my king's defensive pawns are all still there on the second rank, and I've got this nice pawn chain in the middle, which are on the dark squares, effectively cutting off a lot of the board or a lot of the lines for this bishop here. So I'm thinking that is an advantageous trade. It's worked out better for me. So he's recaptured with a pawn. I move my rook onto the open file, as does my opponent. Now what we've got is a bit of a rook standoff. So here, if I lose my nerve and I capture, and then his rook on a8 recaptures, then his rook is now in command of the open file, and there's nothing I can do. I can't move my a1 rook to e1, because he will capture, it would be checkmate. Right, so I would end up having to move my king over to f1, which is not a bad idea anyway in these positions. Okay, so I decide to improve my knight. I want to bring it into the middle of the board. I want to cause some trouble. There's a nice square here on g6 for it. Potentially, I could even put it on e5, but I don't really want to swap off my tasty knight for his slightly weak dark squared bishop, especially, and I don't want my d pawn to become isolated either. So I want to maintain the position. If I have to, I'll bore my opponent to defeat. Okay, so I move my king across to f1 just to back up, give some more reinforcement to this e1 square. So it's now reinforced by all my pieces, right? My knight, my king, and my other rook are all looking after that rook there. He plays another pawn move, which again I think is maybe a little bit rash. Is he trying to persuade my knight to vacate f3, which is its natural defensive square? Maybe. But then, you know, my knight can always come round. That's another nice place for my knight to go to on c5 as well. So I think double up my rooks, okay? Generally a good idea. So if I now move rook a to e1 and he does nothing, I can safely capture on e8. If he recaptures, I recapture and I'm up a rook and in a winning position. So he comes in aggressively, rook to e4. Not quite sure of the point of that move. So I maneuver my knight. If he captures my rook, king recaptures, that's not a problem. He does, king recaptures, rook e8 with check, king comes back to f1. No problems here, okay? So I'm still happy. I haven't messed around with my pawns. My pawns are still good. His pawns are starting to look very scattered around the board, okay? But you know, he's got space on his side, but he hasn't got many pieces to use in that space. So I decide, look, at this point in time, I'm looking now towards an ending where it's going to be a knight against one bishop. Now, two bishops is great. Two bishops can squeeze a king into a corner. They can checkmate. And the advantage of having two bishops is that it gets rid of the disadvantage of having one. The disadvantage of one bishop is bishops can only go on one colour, right? So if your opponent's only got one bishop in the ending, if you put all your pawns on the opposite colour to that bishop, then your bishop can move all around the board. It can go to half the squares on the board, but it can never capture any of your pawns, right? Unlike a single knight can land potentially on every single square on the board. So in that sense, and it obviously depends on the layout, but in that sense, a knight can be stronger in some ways than a single bishop. So it suits me to trade. He decides to bring his king. He doesn't want to move his rook off the e-file and give me the e-file. So he moves his king there, and I decide let's go and trade, and let's go into an ending now. Okay, well, end game. So g3 is played. I'm now thinking I want to block this board. I want to stuff it up. I want to get my king up the board, and I want to allow this beautiful knight now to jump wherever it likes. It can get to any square on the board, unlike his remaining piece. King moves forward, king moves forward, king moves forward, b4. So now I'm going for this triangle approach, okay? So his king cannot enter into that triangle, cannot come around the sides of the triangle, right? And then I'll probably play a3 at some point. So, you know, if he tries to break through with his pawn, pawn comes through, pawn takes b4, and then if my pawn's on a3, I just recapture, and I've maintained that pressure. So I'm creating force fields that his king can't get through. His king is the most powerful piece he's got. So I do play a3, king moves back. I'm starting to maneuver my knight round, and now we can start to see the power of the knights. Okay, so my knight can go there. It can go there. It's got options that can have an effect on the game. And the other great thing about knights at this point in the game is that you've often got opportunities to create forks and surprise your opponent, maybe win a piece or win pawns, right? So I'm not going to stick my knight. I don't want my knight to trade with that bishop. Not at this point. There'd be no advantage. So he's coming up. He's now blocked off this nice square from my king, which is an annoyance. So I do actually bring my knight in at this point, because I figure that if he trades now, okay, so at this point it wasn't to my advantage as much, but now I realise it is. Now I move my knight in. If he takes my knight with his bishop, apologise for the dogs barking in the background, okay, my pawn recaptures and his king is stuck on the b file, okay? And now my king could then go in, start eating pawns like Pac-Man, and then gobble up these pawns, and then I'm going to queen one of these pawns on that side of the board, right? He'd be unable to defend. Okay, he doesn't, he figures the same, he doesn't go for that. He pushes a5. I'm not going to take a5, absolutely not. I come here with a check, king moves, another check, king moves, and now I've got a fork on the bishop and the h6 pawn. He can defend it by moving there, but now he's had to vacate that diagonal. Now my king can get in. He takes, I recapture, quite comfortable there. King moves across, so now I'm starting to, devour pawns. There's a check, and attack on the bishop, take another pawn, and it's a fairly straightforward ending from this point in time. Okay, and there's a fork, get the last piece. Now, you still have to be careful at this point in time. All three of his pawns are blocked, so his king is the only piece that can move. I need to be very careful not to allow him to get stalemate. Okay, so I'm playing fairly quick at this point, but I'm being careful. The only thing I have to check is on each move, does his king have a square it can move to legally? If so, that's fine. Okay, and now I take the last pawn, king comes back, and I'm pressing now in, and he resigns the game, and I get something like 12 points or something like that for the win. So what have I learned from this? What I've learned is that you can get a lot more points if you beat a strong opponent than if you beat a weaker one. There's lots of reasons to play stronger opponents. You will play better chess, okay? And when you play better chess, when you play your best chess, your chess will improve. So that's a really good reason, okay? The other one is you're not risking so many points if you lose. If you lose, it's a good learning experience, and you've lost playing good chess. Therefore, you haven't lost much. You've lost a few points, but you've gained more experience. I do think there is value in practicing really putting the screws on when you are in a commanding position and winning a game, which can make playing weaker opponents. It's one reason to go for that. But I think on the whole, I'm gonna do this more. I'm going to take on some Goliaths with the prospect of getting a lot more rating points, prospect of playing better chess, higher standard, higher level. I will improve, and I'll probably enjoy the process more, because it's a horrible feeling when you've probably done it yourself, thinking, I'm going to have a quick game. I'm going to have a quick game, and I'll try and get some points, try and improve my rating, just 5 more, 6 more, or something like that. And what happens? You're rushing. Your opponent is playing the higher rated person, so they slow down, they take their time, they've got much more to gain, you've got much more to lose. That advantage so often plays into the hands of the lower rated player. So this is what I'm going to do for a while, and hopefully it'll work out, and I'll let you know how we get on. But I wanted to share this with you just to celebrate my biggest win in Rapid. I'll see you next time.